Hey guys, Henning and Morten from FlippedNormals here. In this video, we are going to be covering some of, I think, the cooler features for Blender 2.81 and some of the features that, we will be using or have been using specifically. It's not going to be like a 1 hour overview of everything new in Blender because, I don't know, there's a lot of things to cover and we don't want to waste your time basically. So the star of the show is definitely sculpting. Everyone who's using Blender probably knows that Pablo has been doing excellent work of implementing a lot of new features into the sculpting. It was the sculpting branch of Blender, and now it's in the master build of Blender. So it's really cool to see that sculpting is finally getting an overhaul and getting new features added because it's been missing for a long time. One cool thing, well, I guess it's the thing that have been missing from sculpting since forever, is how the cursor now deforms or conforms to the surface normal of whatever you're sculpting. It seems like it's weird to think about but it's actually really hard to sculpt properly when you can't see where the sculpt or where the brush actually conforms to your mesh, because it gives you a nice overview of where is the normals actually facing when you're doing this kind of sculpting. So this change, which seems quite trivial, is actually, I think, really, really big.
Sculpting is often in the smaller things, and if it's screen-based, it's very tricky to actually get anything to look exactly the way you want it to.
Yeah, and this, we'll just be covering some of the ones that we think are cool. Auto masking, where you have the option for topology masking, is a big one because it means that you can be sculpting on, even though your brush radius is big, let's say you're dragging this piece of the hair over here, if it's based on something that's topologically connected, it's not going to affect the part over here. So you can work in a more localized way with your meshes without having to scale down your brush first and then drag. You can have a big brush, but if even though it's topologically connected, it's not going to affect whatever happens on the other side basically.
Also, if you are wondering how Blender compares to ZBrush, we either have or we are coming out very soon with a video on ZBrush versus Blender. So make sure to check that out in the future or currently on our channel.
Now, obviously, also a lot of new brushes have been added. And this is something it's easy to forget, especially if you've been using the sculpting branch. But Blender's sort of default brushes were quite lacking before. And it's really cool to see that so much inspiration has been taken from ZBrush and how to integrate the really good features or the really good things about ZBrush into Blender. So, in terms of, I think the brush engine has been reworked, the fall off and the feel of the brushes have also been reworked quite a lot. For me, something like an equivalent of a clay buildup brush, I think it's like the clay strips in Blender, feels a lot more like the one in ZBrush. It still has its ways to go, especially when you're working on bigger subjects or bigger surfaces at any given time. It falls a little short still, but the smaller areas and in terms of building up form, it does that really, really well. If we're looking at in terms of the UI as well here, just with the brushes, the one thing that's really cool to me is actually this pose brush here, which allows you to allows to pose appendages, legs, arms, that kind of stuff. I've tried experimenting with it for heads as well, but there's not it doesn't seem like there's a fall off control for it, but I'm sure that could come in the future. But the pose brush is a really cool addition, I think.
Yeah, we've been trying to pose a neck with it. It was almost like the neck was broken, but yeah, it looks like it was really good if you're posing a finger or an arm or something like that.
Now my sort of workaround for that, and that kind of leads into this whole section, is in conjunction with masking. There's a lot of mask filters that have been implemented, and in terms of if you use the ZBrush, you just know it as masking, and you have different operations you can do to your masks. So it's called mask filters in Blender, and what you can do is you can grow the mask, you can contract the mask, and you can smooth it. So these are all accessible from a mask menu that appears once you start using some brushes, or if you use the masking brush, as well as cutting out meshes to isolate it, and cutting out stuff to actually mask it. I like this kind of mask expand feature here, that it works both based on topology and it also works based on curvature. So that's another cool masking feature. As well as mask extract, which is something that you might know from ZBrush, where if you select the part of the mesh, you mask a part of the mesh, that piece can then be extracted. Actually, I have a really cool video on it here. And the interesting part about this, you mask it and you extract it. This actually gets added as a modifier. So if you look under your object in your outliner, you'll be able to see that it has a modifier applied to it, and that's that's how you can control the thickness of that object. Now, the pose brush, like I mentioned, really cool. It's really great for, I would say, for characters, posing characters really quickly. And if you combine that with something like a smooth mask, you could get around the problem of getting these really hard breaks when you're trying to pose them. I'd say it's a little bit fidgety because it's based on cursor size and not necessarily drag in like an in and out point. Kind of if you use the transpose tools in ZBrush, the transposing, then it's a different way to think about it. I think it works off of volume, sort of like it looks at the center of the volume and then tries to pose it from that. Generally, it does a really good job. And sort of like the piggyback off of that is the elastic deform brushes. You can see that's this one going here. I think it was based off of like a Pixar paper that was done, I don't know for what film, but there was something like Finding Nemo or something. I at least saw something in the paper. Finding Dory, maybe that's the one with like an octopus or something. Yeah, and it's actually really cool what you can do with it. This is a really simple example where you're just you're basically just translating an object and it has this kind of nice gooey elastic fall off. But I actually find it quite interesting if you combine the grab with the scale to do caricatures, especially if you're doing caricatures, right? So you can scale something up and it has this really organic fall off to it. So combining that with the grab brush, you can sort of experiment with the proportions of your characters really quickly. And again, if you combine that with the new masking filters, so you have soft fall offs, I think it makes it even more powerful.
This is one of the cooler features, and it's a bit hard to explain it if you're not actually trying it out, because you could just be like, why is this not just like something like the opposite of a pinch brush or just the move brush? But it is just different. Like it feels like it has true elasticity of your model, and it's such a nice brush, or such a nice feature to work with.
Yes, like it's less localized. Actually, when you use it, so the main fall off area I think is based off of your brush size, but it will affect your entire mesh at once. So using it in conjunction with masking makes it just a lot more powerful. And that also sort of leads over to the transform tools, which is something that was actually missing and has been really annoying not to have in Blender. So here, using the masking, where you can drag out the mask based on topology, use the new transform tools, which is just like the existing transform gizmos from your regular viewport, put that into the sculpt mode, and now you can actually, with more precision, more control, you can then pose your characters. You can use this in conjunction with the pose brush as well. So I think these two tools really complement each other really well. And just as a quick note for the elastic tools here, there's nothing about it in the documentation as far as I can find. The way you use it, go to the elastic thing, and then under your brush settings, that's where you'll find the settings for it. Now, this was actually quite a big thing that I'm sorry to say it's been a little bit disappointing for me. It's really cool getting remeshing, sort of like a true remeshing system into Blender. This is kind of a comparable to Dynamesh in ZBrush, the OpenVDB voxel remesher, and it's pretty fast. But like if we're comparing it to ZBrush, which we are, because it's sculpting and ZBrush is the king of sculpting, it doesn't perform as well. And also I feel like it doesn't close the mesh. There are some things that work a little bit differently. It could just be because it's OpenVDB and ZBrush obviously uses maybe a different algorithm for it. And I didn't find it as fast. I think it's a good first pass of a remesher inside of ZBrush, inside of Blender 2.8.1. And I'm sure it's just going to continue to get better and better, but it's definitely cool to see it in there. The other one is Quadraflow Remesher, which is supposed to be a way to, quadrangulate your mesh, I suppose. So, you have kind of nice working topology to work off of. In my experience, it doesn't work. I haven't actually gotten it to work a single time. I can get it to work on spheres and cubes, but let's be realistic. If you're working in a sort of like production environment, you're doing concepting, I can't actually get these two to work together. Sort of like my usual workflow is remeshing and then, quadrangulating a mesh, and then sculpt it up, subdivide it. I can't quite get this workflow to work. I'm hoping this is something that's going to get looked more at, because the way it's implemented currently, it's not really working, I think. But, at least the feature's there, and we can see there's like on the horizon it could get better and better. Now, one thing that we're really excited about is the NVIDIA RTX support. It's like we tested it out with the RTX card that we have here, and it's crazy fast.
That's a 2070.
Yeah, it's like crazy fast with new optics in it. I don't know.
It was run twice the speed. We did actually quite a few tests with it. Twice the speed, a little bit of computation time just to load it into RTX or however it works. But it looks exactly the same. Particularly if you're comparing it with CPU rendering, like it's not. We're talking twice as fast from regular RTX to optics.
Yeah, we just enabled optics in your preferences. That's it.
So I'm very excited about where we can take it from here as well. Yeah, we're probably going to do more on this in the future as well, because RTX support is amazing.
We might have a new card coming that we can test this with, a slightly more powerful card. So I'm excited to see, but more about that in the future, I guess. The same thing with the denoiser. Like, we tested this out briefly when it was still in beta, and I'm quite impressed by the results of this. Obviously, it's one of those, like, I feel more experimental technologies that will just get better and better with time as the... Is it a AI-based denoiser?
Yeah, this is full on AI.
Because I don't know AI stuff. Like, who knows what that does? But like, okay, so here's an example. Good, bad, right? So this is what the denoiser does, and it's quite impressive to see. Like, this is the same render without the denoising, and how much like it can just infer so much of what it thinks is in the image. Now, people have done crazy renders with this, where they do like one sample and it makes a complete image. But it's kind of blotchy, and people who might not be that much in the know looked at it and was like, well, it's still a shitty render. Well, that's kind of not the point of it. I feel like it's more that maybe you can render with half the samples that you normally would, let the denoiser infer the rest, and now you have half the render time. So, and this is just going to get more and more powerful and faster and faster.
Or what you can do is for preview renders, if you want to have a full animation of this, what you often need is, you don't need a perfect quality. You just need to see what does this look like with animation, and now you can see something which looks like it's far more valuable to you than something which is crazy noisy. It speeds up iteration time significantly, and I'm very excited about where denoising is going in the future.
Yeah, I mean, denoising is just something that it's just awesome. It helps everyone. It's never bad with denoising, I think. So along with, I know they're talking about cycles here, and stuff has been improved.
Honorable mentions.
Honorable mentions. Great. We don't use a lot of this, so we can't really talk that much about it, but cycles has gotten an upgrade. But for us, really, I mean, especially for me, is Eevee. I most of the time just use Eevee because I can look at my stuff in real time. And one thing that got better for me was the soft shadows and especially volumetrics. Working with that in 281 has been just a treat. Like, it's so fast to work with, and it looks a lot better this time. The same thing when it comes to bump mapping, actually looks a lot better. It had a kind of harsh look, I feel like, before with Eevee, but in general, I think it looks a lot better now. So I'm just super excited about any sort of update or change that's coming to Eevee, because for me, like, I think, this is the future. Unless the new RTX cards, like, just crazy performance increases with cycles, maybe we can like get close where eventually they're like equal performance, but cycles just looks better because everything has, true bounce light and GI and everything.
What I'm also excited about is seeing how Eevee can be used more as a preview render, and then you can switch to cycles. It seems like there are still some translation issues, which look quite different, particularly with lighting. You can't light it in Eevee and then just hit render in cycles. Ideally, if you could reach a point where it's like a 1-to-1, the shaders, as far as I know, are pretty much 1-to-1.
Yeah.
There are some specific cycles features, but the moment you can have that, then that's a complete game changer.
Yeah, like for me, one of the big issues is I don't know how to solve this, because that's just a limitation of real time, it seems, is the occlusion for not ambient occlusion, but the occlusion of objects and reflections. So if you have a object here and you have an object occluding in the front, I still see, you know, there's still light leaking and reflections coming through an object that really should be occluded. I'm sure that's something that can be solved in the future. I don't know how this stuff works, but you know, I just love anything real time that I can work with, where I can light my shots, or I can sculpt and see lighting in real time. That's something that excites me.
And you can model it with it as well.
Yeah.
I mean, anything which speeds up iteration time, I'm a huge fan of.
Then we have Grease Pencil. It's a feature that we've looked at, not used it a whole ton. I think like some of the stuff that got translated from the sculpting branch, some of the improvements also got put into Grease Pencil, and just general painting. I think some of that was translated over to Grease Pencil as well. I don't know too much about it because it's not a feature I really use, so I unfortunately can't say too much about it. But I think Grease Pencil is a super cool thing. As you know, heard that Jama is doing some really cool stuff with concepting and using Grease Pencil to draw over and do paint overs with it, so that's really cool. Now this one here is kind of like, I'm a little torn with the file browser, because like I remember having a Twitter thread about this where I talked to some, I think, developers and people using Blender. I really wanted a OS browser window, just because I have everything I need in terms of importing and file treatment within the OS browsers. This is an improvement from the previous version, because like this is just it's a completely new file browser. The previous file browser was really bad. It was cluttered. I feel like it didn't look good. Now like this feels like it's been brought into the new world of like new Blender. But again, I feel like it introduced a lot of things I personally don't need. I hope this is useful for other people for sure, where there's features that they definitely need. But for me, I would love to see just a pure OS browser, just a setting, just enable, allow OS browser.
I love this in Maya, that you can completely bypass it. And for anyone who's using Maya, you can do that.
Yeah, small Maya tip.
Didn't know that until recently.
So, but you know, it's cool to see an update to it, because this file browser it's like miles better than the existing or the previous browser. There's still some work to be done for sure, and my wish is just for a actual OS browser. Now this, for me personally, I think this is probably one of the best changes to Blender 2.8.1. It might seem weird, but yeah, the outliner has gotten a huge overhaul. I can't remember the guy's name, but I talked to him on Twitter. He was the guy who sent me this. He was working on this Google Summer of Code or something, where I think it's just like one guy that did most of this stuff, and you have a functional outliner exactly how you would expect it to work. You know, you can go up and down, arrow keys, you can select, there's link selection. So if you select something in your outliner, it selects in the viewport, vice versa. Shift select to select multiple things. It just works a lot better now.
This was probably the most frustrating thing about learning Blender 2.8 for me, that the outliner, it looked so good. Like it was such a refreshing take on compared to what they had before, but it was for me completely unusable, that you didn't know if something was selected or not. So this here is probably the biggest thing for me in 2.81.
Yeah, working with any kind of scene, let's say in a production environment where you have hundreds, maybe thousands of files in one scene, it made it really hard. Unless it was pre-organized, everything was pre-organized, it was really hard to clean up, and it was really hard to work with. This was something that we talked about before in terms of, let's say you get files or projects over from other studios that you haven't been involved in. Maybe it's organized differently, maybe it's not organized at all. Getting that into the previous outliner was an actual nightmare. But with the way the outliner works now, the filtering is solid from before, and now you can actually select stuff and you can properly organize it. I think this is, you know, it's one of the best features they've introduced. Then, yeah, transform snapping. It's a really welcome change, that to be able to actually manipulate your origin. I think that's a huge one, because before, what we had to do, I mean, everyone knows it, we had a 3D cursor, snap a 3D cursor to a thing, snap the origin, have the object. It was just a mess. But being able to actually manipulate the origin now and also snap the origin, you know, you can enable vertex snapping to snap the origin to a specific vertex without having to use the 3D cursor first. I think, you know, it's a natural thing that kind of got overlooked for a while, and maybe people didn't request it enough. But with the sort of way that Blender is moving forward and where it wants to be, I think, excellent addition. Then we have the poly build. I guess I haven't used that, so you can talk about that.
Yeah, this is my domain. So we've actually recorded a tutorial on using this, which comes out at some point. So poly build is in 281 is definitely a big improvement of what's been there before as well. Like you can make automatic quads, like you can see here in the video. So it's a pretty nice tool. And I posted a video on this on Twitter of just me doing like a quick 6-minute retopology video of it. And there were a lot of questions being like, is Blender now the best retopo tool out there because it looks so intuitive? And it's not. Like the tool here is a big improvement, but retopo in Blender still is extremely lacking. The tool feels, I guess it's still a very much work in progress, which is fair enough, but it feels very much like it's a work in progress. If you compare it to some of the other tools out there, like the Quadro tool in Maya, which is probably the gold standard, like it's like 10-20% of the way there. So unfortunately, Retopo in Blender is still extremely lacking at the moment, which hopefully will be remedied in the future. But we're not talking about the upgrade from 2.8 to 281 in terms of that. Like we need like way more improvement for it to be taken as a serious retopo tool.
Yeah, there's definitely a framework for it now that can then be built upon. But, after you and I having talked about it, I've used it briefly, but watching you work and watching how the tool works, it is apparent that things are lacking. It's cool to have it in there and to see that, things are definitely progressing and retopology is also being taken seriously. But it's a tool in its infancy right now that there's lots to improve, but it's cool to have it in there at least.
If we keep seeing these improvements over the next year, that every third month we get this level of improvement, then in maybe a year or year and a half, we're gonna see something equivalent of Maya Quadro.
So library overrides, honestly, I don't know what it is. I don't use it. So we are going to skip that because there's no point in talking about it. For the viewport in itself, this is something we haven't really looked at a lot. Like, we've worked with collections. There are collections in there. But most of what we do is general modeling, organization, a little bit, sculpting, and then rendering in Eeevee and cycles. Now, this one is exciting to me. A standard production tool that every single studio has their own version of the comment renamer. For Maya, we have a batch renamer in Blender. So this is another one of those that sort of ties in with the outliner, where it just makes scene organization a lot easier, and it's something that you definitely need in a production. So having it in there, being able to use, I think you use regular expressions as well, find, replace, everything you need, prefix, what's it, postfix, suffix, that kind of stuff. So really good, really solid implementation, I think. So a bunch of other features that we don't really cover here is you looked into FBX a little bit. It seems like the FBX implementation is still lacking, probably more on the Autodesk side just because they don't release documentation. It's definitely getting improved. There's improvements to Alembic. So it does look like Blender is starting to up their game and in terms of getting this into the hands of studios or getting it ready for major studios to work with at least.
Yeah, if Blender continues with this, it will be on a very good path. One thing I really wish, if any Blender devs are listening, I would very much like a better documentation system of it. Like when we were looking into trying to figure out how these features work, there really isn't a lot of documentation for it. You might find it on a forum thread somewhere here and there, or you might find it in the change logs of the feature. But if you were to go to the docs of a lot of the features here, they're not there at all, or it's just the most basic version of it.
Yeah, like for me, I was looking a lot into the sculpting features because I used the sculpting branch, kind of left it alone for a while, and then this got released. And playing around with it, I mean, it's like Henning says, like my one plea to I don't know who writes the docs, the developers or whoever does it. You need to up your doc game because it's actually impossible to figure out how a lot of these features actually work. One example was the elastic deformer. I had never used the tool before, and when you search for elastic deformer in the docs, it doesn't show up. You have to go to to the release notes for 2.8.1 to there even being a mention of the elastic deformer, and even that doesn't tell you how the tool works. And I found that to be the case with a lot of the features as well. So having a more solid documentation, I think, will make it a lot easier for newcomers, also for studios to like delve into the docs and figure out how do we actually use the tools that you've now provided us.
But overall, fantastic release. Some very much needed features here, like the outliner and batch renamer. So we're very excited about this.
But yeah, so that just about covers everything that I guess we find exciting and are excited about and think could be better in terms of the Blender 2.8.1 release. I'm excited to see what's coming up in 2.8.2. For me, please update those docs and get more documentation out there. I don't know, demonstration videos, whatever could help. But also another plea I would have would be to think about the speed of release. For me personally, it's really cool to see the momentum that Blender has behind it, but it does also feel like a lot of the features that are getting implemented, especially new features, are basically pre-alpha features in the software in order to make it look great. But once you start getting, knee deep into the features, you do start to realize that these features are kind of lackluster. It can be up to this whole like open source environment where a lot of the development is really aimed at other people contributing. But when you look at it from the outside as a finished, quote unquote, finished software that we want to push out into the world, some of the tools come off as very, very immature and not ready for production yet.
It really feels like, particularly Polybuild, which is the one I've been using the most, is that this for other vendors, like I've been doing beta testing for Moto for some time. This would be like the second beta out of 30 betas, and it would have a lot of refinement for it. It is an interesting one because when it comes to it, like this is a stable release, like this is a proper release. So I'm assuming that whatever is in here should be full on ready to use, and it seems like it's lacking a lot of refinement. So I'm hopefully these tools will be improved upon a lot further and not just, okay, now we have the feature, let's move on to the next one. But they will, particularly like when it comes to retopology, that this is an area which will be taken very seriously, and where the UX of it, the user experience will really be taken as the first thing to be looked at.
So yeah, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to see more videos like this in the future, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And we will see you in the next video.